All right, here we are. This is going to be our second live demo. The first was our Rochambeau. This one we've got some chess to look at. And a good friend of mine from way, way back is on to take a look with us. Leaf, living in Istanbul right now. Glad to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So we're gonna start. We want to do just a quick rundown of sort of the high level platform that we've been working on, Squad, and then drill down into sort of the depths of writing a game for Squad and making pieces for Squad. So we're gonna start with Squad. Squad is an SDK. You want to take it from there, Ezra?
Yeah, sure. So at this point, Squad really is just an SDK, and we are aiming for it to be useful for making video games, essentially any kind of game, but right now video games that natively support modding
Mm-hmm.
in a way that lets the people contributing those mods get credit and financial rewards for their work, and also helps the system curate the best versions of the modded games. So
Right.
putting together all the puzzle pieces in ways that people like, which sounds pretty simple, and hopefully the end result will be pretty simple, but we do rethink some of the basic things
Yeah.
for letting games to do that.
Yep.
The reason we think this is an exciting idea is because we think it can enable this new way of thinking about designing games driven by metadata. So the game designers are focusing really on the system, on the engine, and then they're allowing the community of people that are contributing to their game to really figure out the best formats, the best balance changes, the best new content.
Yep.
So to fill in the rest of the details.
Yeah.
And the short story of how we're trying to do this is we're trying to do a sort of a crypto-economic system. Trying to design a crypto-economic system. Everything in the SDK is defined in metadata definitions. Right now, that's games, formats, and components, which
Yep.
we'll talk more later.
Yep.
And any of those definitions can be associated with a license and also a token. The licenses basically help have a system where any money, any value that's being generated by a game, say has a revenue model, can flow down to the people that have contributed mods and new
Yep.
pieces to that game. And then the token can give us market data about all of that stuff that we can use to curate, this is the most commonly played version of this game. It seems to be the thing people are most interested in.
Yep. It's
Other ways.
it has earned the most market value for whatever reason, and we think that that's going to be a very powerful curation model. And yeah, these token models. This basically is intended to pay the crowd for the wisdom of the crowd in developing and designing games.
Yeah, and we could definitely talk forever about this, but
Yep.
but that's the rundown. We have our reasons for thinking this is a good idea. Blah
Yep.
blah blah.
Yep.
But I think we kind of just want to run in today to a really specific part of this, which is looking at a version of chess that we've started to build that shows any potential game developers how they might build a game that takes advantage of the SDK,
Right.
that works with this metadata, that lets people contribute things. So I think that's what we're going to look at now.
Yep.
So let's see. Don't think it's basically. I'm going to run two things right now in
Yep.
my console. I don't think I need to show them again.
No, and I can talk about what's kind of going on here. So we need to stand up two backing pieces of this. We need to stand up a Metastore, which is the back-end service that maintains all of the metadata definitions. So this will have the definitions for games, the definitions for components, and the definitions for formats. And then our software will end up reading from that Metastore and running a game on the page the way we'll look at. And then the other part is to stand up that client, the game. So we're running a Metastore and Squad Chess. and those two things will interact with each other to see what we're doing here.
Right. So are we seeing chess right now?
Yep, we are seeing mostly chess.
Not exactly chess,
Yeah, not exactly chess. We're seeing lazy developer chess.
So we're not going to be doing much in the UI. I just wanted to kind of
Yeah.
show the basic visual of what's going on. So
Yep.
we've got a chessboard, you got pieces, we can move them around. You know, it does basically the types of things you'd expect.
Yeah.
And this is not exactly chess, but you can see it's the right size of board, a lot of the right pieces.
Yeah.
And pieces mostly do the types of
Yeah.
things that you expect them to do. And here's another very different looking format. That's called 1.58D chess. This is the Vitalik theoretical format.
Yeah.
So immediately it looks pretty weird. So demonstrating that you can pretty easily change the shape of the board into
Right.
pretty much anything. It has to be squares, of course, but it
Yep.
could be any arbitrary set of squares.
Yep.
And you've got some pieces here again. The weird thing that the pieces are doing here is, white is moving sort of up, but black is actually moving sideways here. So their pawns move sideways.
Yep.
So you could do things like that as well.
And the important distinction here is that the only difference between these two is that we're loading different metadata from the metastore. So the differences are all defined in metadata.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So the metadata is including, in this case, the shape of the board,
Yes.
presumably the pieces, how they move, and so
Yes.
forth.
Yes.
So I can see.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think that's just what we'll go and look at now.
Yep. Yeah, we
don't
should.
need- we
Right.
need to look at anything else here. So I think I can switch what I'm presenting to.
I really want to see you guys play, and
Yeah. Yeah.
We don't actually have 2-player in here.
Right.
Jesse would have to tell me the moves he wanted to make.
Right. So this is actually just the engine that we've built so far. We haven't built any kind of like players joining games or creating games or even determining winners. It's just the engine with the position and moving pieces and figuring out legal moves. Yep.
There we just promoted our pawn. So.
Right.
Very
nice.
Right. So let me stop my presentation just for a second so
Yep.
that I can add it back to the thing we want, because unfortunately this is the flow we got used.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here we're looking at some of the code. Like Jesse said, this is Squad Chess is just a web app. It's a Mithril app. That doesn't matter, but this is just sort of regular looking web app stuff. The important part is the part that has to do with the SDK, that has to do with dealing with this metadata, is this rules section.
Yep.
And we're definitely not going to go through all the code now, but
Nope.
basically what we've tried to do is break the idea of chess down into some basic data types that the metadata can feed into. So as you mentioned, Lee, we've got something for pieces. So there's a way to define what a piece looks like. Actually, we can bring up.
Yeah, let's start, I think, looking at the data format first makes sense, and then we can see how we interpret that data format. Yeah.
That's a good idea. Right. So let's look at some of the metadata. So here's a component for Squad Chess.
Yeah.
Which is a piece in this case. Components is sort of our word for the basic pieces of a game right now. So this is a rook. So you can see that it's got a name, and then it's got some data in here. It's got some different ways it has of moving. So the piece can move around, and it tells you kind of how it can do that, and it can also capture other pieces. It tells you how it can do that. And then it's got some basic information about what the game should display as an image. And that's everything that we need to define a piece. So we've got a bunch of pieces like following the same format.
Right.
Promotion actually has to work a slightly different way, but I don't think we need to go into that.
We don't need to, yeah.
It's the same principle.
Suffice it to say that when you define a piece by specifying an offset, basically a slope that it can move in, and then how many steps it can take along that slope. So a pawn can take one step along its straight ahead slope for moving, and it can take one step along an angled slope in a given direction for capturing, and we've separated those two. So most pieces will have an identical move and an identical capture, but there's no reason that you couldn't have a rook, like a piece that can move like a rook and capture like a bishop, but it has to capture to move like a bishop or something. And it can't capture like a rook. So those two ideas have been separated, and then promotionability. If it lands on a promotion piece, it turns into a random other piece. Is how we've implemented random promotion. We could.
Which is mostly just lazy UI.
Yep. Basically. Yep.
And so the way we've broken down what makes up a piece is it's not necessarily the optimal way to do it. I think the important part of the idea is trying to do that at all.
It can be done. Yeah.
We can break up the types of things pieces do into mechanics so that when someone wants to make a new piece, they can put together those pieces in a new way that is relatively simple to represent in metadata. It doesn't involve them having to actually script something in the components, and that can actually lead to a lot of possible pieces.
Right.
Using some.
Yeah, pieces that don't exist in regular chess.
Right. And then the other main type of definition that we're using here is a format, and a format for squad chess includes a starting position. So this is defining both what the board is going to look like using these like Cartesian coordinates, basically.
Right.
And it's also telling you what the first position should look like. So it's telling you if there's something on that square, what it is, and which player it belongs to, and also whether or not that square is a promotion square. So there are other mechanics. You could have other stuff here, but right now promotion is the only thing that works that way.
Yep.
So it's got that starting position, and then the only other data that this has right now is this orientation thing. And this is the thing that tells you, okay, normally, white moves up and black moves down, but we've got this weird version where white moves up and black moves sideways. So this lets you tell the game to rotate in any of the four cardinal directions. Which for a piece like a rook doesn't actually do anything, but for a pawn it changes how the pawn can move.
Right.
And yeah, that's all the metadata that this is using to create the starting position.
And so this metadata is then registered in the Metastore, and the game loads one of the formats, and the format has the starting position and a list of components that are legal in that format, or that make up the format. So a format could be just pawns with a starting position of pawns all the way across. Or a format could be just your weird new awkward pieces and their starting position. So the format is really the game that you're playing. And the game in this case is the sort of type of game.
So that's the basic metadata, and then the engine is an attempt to let people combine those tools in as many ways as possible. The idea being, hopefully it's very easy once we make a nice UI that lets people do this, to make new components and new formats. And we're not showing this right now, but there's also a way, if people are paying to play the game in general, for some of that money to flow to the people that create the pieces.
Right.
That's kind of a different system that we're not talking about today.
Yeah.
But that's also going to be part of it.
Yeah.
So some of the sort of cool things you can imagine are like, what if you put promotion squares in the middle of the board, so it's sort of a race to get there, or some particular place. If you make the board some kind of weird shape, like a snake or something, like, who knows? Most of these games are going to be awful, but there's probably some cool stuff to discover in there.
Yeah.
That you're only going to discover if you kind of leave it up to a crowd of people to try out lots of different crazy ideas.
Yep.
And we also think this approach is pretty immediately applicable to almost any kind of game you can think of. Like a first-person shooter has components. It has the guns you use and the maps you play on and the characters if it's a game with different characters. Tower defense games have enemies and towers and maps. MOBAs have characters and maps and items. And I think you could probably do this with almost any kind of game. sometimes is going to be easier than others, but especially if you're starting from the beginning with this idea of doing it with metadata, I think most games you can make conform to this kind of idea.
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe harder to go backwards if you've already written a whole game engine. We actually started when we were first playing with chess. We started with some chess libraries and first thought, oh, maybe we can just modify it, and it ended up being way easier to just
Build it
do
from scratch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty much it, actually.
Yeah. Do you wanna show kind of the different? Maybe what we can do is show fixing that standard chess, or like we have our lazy chess with all the rooks. Let's take a look at what it might take to change that to actual chess, because I have since implemented or created the metadata for bishops and queens
Right, so that's here. Right?
and
So
load
this
deaths. Yeah.
is the chess format, which
Right.
is not
It's
really
all
using
rooks. Yeah.
all these rooks, right? So all
Yeah.
you would need to change this would be, as long as you've made the components for the other pieces,
Or as long as somebody has, as long as they're in the meta store. Yeah.
they're in the metastore somewhere, then you can reference them here, and
Yep.
so this would be a bishop, right?
Yep.
Then a knight, then a king, then a queen, and it's still this belonging to the same player, so you wouldn't need to change
Right.
that. So that's basically all you would need to do to change the format.
Yeah. And now if you run that load defs again and refresh, we'll see another chess format. It'll still be called chess because that's the name. We didn't change the name, but it's a different set of metadata, and so it'll show up, and we can play it just by having changed that and submitting it to the metastore.
Yeah, so I can show that real quick. Stop presenting. Window. Yeah, so you can see now we've got two chesses. One of them is all rooks, and this one is at least a little bit fixed.
A little bit fixed. Yeah. So we swap those in, and those just work.
But all we did was change that, and
Yep.
That's cool.
Yep.
and so that's pretty much what we wanted to show today was
Yep.
this idea of trying to make a version of chess that is driven by this metadata idea, and hopefully showing that given the UI and UX stuff is all taken care of, you could make a system that would make it really easy for just regular chess players to have an idea and then put it in there and see if other people liked it.
Yep.
And it would be as easy as making a post on a forum or something like that, or almost as easy.
Almost as easy. Yeah.
And
Right, yeah.
you might even be able to make some money off of it or something like that.
Right.
We'll deal with that later. But that's sort of what we wanted to show today. So I think we can go to the Q&A now.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Did that? I guess we'll start by. Did that make enough sense for that you think you could jump in, pull down the repo, start playing with this, and start making some formats or some components?
I definitely think so.
Yeah.
I'd have to read the README.
Right.
But it
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
for sure.
Totally.
I
Totally.
would be really curious to see, writing a piece. So there's the
Sure.
gameplay mechanic, but
Yeah.
let's say I want to create a new chess piece
Yeah.
altogether.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah. Let's
I
talk
guess
through
you
it.
Kind of,
Yeah.
you
We can
touched
definitely
on,
look at that.
I guess, some of that, but
Yeah, so we could talk about a knight that can move 2 spaces instead of 1, for example,
Yeah.
in whatever direction along that sort of 2-to-1 slope.
Yeah, so let me bring up knight. Yeah, so here's
Yeah.
knight. So yeah, as you can see, this is clearly a little bit more difficult to think about, or
Yeah.
it's less intuitive looking than a format, right?
Right.
Because you see all this stuff and you're like, what the heck is this?
Right.
What it is mechanics are what the engine is doing is saying, on any given turn, let me look at every square on the board and ask what possible legal positions could happen from here. And it's using it's looking at a square and saying, is there a piece on that square? And then what mechanics does that piece have?
Right.
And then let me use those mechanics to generate new legal positions. So move is a mechanic and capture is a mechanic. The actual functions to make those new positions are in the engine. So if you wanted to add a new mechanic, you would right now that's not a metadata thing. You'd have to actually add the new mechanic to the chess engine. You could even, if you really want to go far, and who knows in the future, mechanics themselves could even be these
Right.
metadata definitions,
Right.
but right now they're not.
Yeah.
So right now there's kind of an available set of them, and then this array of things is inputs into the move mechanic. So
Right.
if I see the knight has the mechanic move, then I can put all these inputs into that function, and if they lead to a legal turn, then I can add that to my set of next possible legal positions.
Right.
And then capture does the same thing. So move means basically go to an empty space. So these are the different ways a knight can go to an empty space, and it's just
Yeah. Up 2 and right 1, up 1 and right 2,
right,
down 2 and right 1,
and it can only go one step.
and it can only do
So if you
that
change
once.
this
Yeah.
2 steps, then you could do this offset twice, right? So you could go
Either once or
up
twice.
2 and over 1,
Oh,
or
right.
up 2 and over 1, and then up 2 and over 1 again, right? So
Yeah.
continue along
Right.
the same
Yeah.
line.
Oh, actually, so you could even have it capture twice. Like,
Yeah. So this does weird stuff.
Well, so I don't think that would allow you to capture 2 pieces along that line. There would be 2 possible captures though.
You could make a different capture mechanic that, like, imagine a rook
Yeah.
that can capture everything along the line.
Right.
at its point.
Right.
on the axis. Right.
And so
Or
as
hop over thing.
yeah, so as we add mechanics to this engine, those kinds of possibilities will come up. These are now just the move and capture like rules from chess. So you can only capture the first thing you get to, but if you had a capture with steps 2, you could capture something 2 hops away.
Right.
But yeah, I think we want to make those other weird, awkward new mechanics like capture everything in a line, or 2 of these things, or hop anything in this line, or whatever.
Right. So that's what we would do, I think, if we were trying to really release
Yeah.
this out to a community. Try to preempt
Totally.
a bunch of
Yeah.
basic mechanics that might lead
Yeah.
to some cool stuff. Just for people.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. I mean, it's good they're broken out for sure. You know, like
Yeah.
the logic there, and I can see, if I was a game developer, building off this engine, like there'll definitely be times where I'd say, yeah, let's open up the mechanics, and someone may have some idea, of a mechanic that makes sense that I didn't think of, or they just want to do something crazy. And,
Yeah, I think
get rid
it's
of gravity or whatever.
Yeah.
it really depends on what ends up who ends up being in the audience of wanting to do stuff, right?
Yeah.
If there are a bunch of developers out there that are happy to like write code for the mechanics,
Yeah.
then yeah, absolutely, let them do that. But if it's mostly just chess players and they don't want to deal with that, then we probably shouldn't make them. But,
Yeah.
So we don't exactly know how that'll turn out. What kinds? Probably different games might have different types of audiences. That
Yeah.
Are
Yeah.
More or less willing to deal with
Yeah.
complex stuff.
Complex
But
software.
right now
yeah.
we have just the mechanics you need to do this, even simpler version of regular chess, right? So there's not, for example, we didn't build castling
Right.
because that's quite a complicated and specific
Right.
mechanic.
Right.
Could have
Right.
put a ton of work into doing that. We didn't actually do that yet.
Yeah.
But that could be another mechanic.
Yeah.
It would look just like these in
Yeah.
spec.
Would definitely changes the model a bit. That
Right.
is interesting.
Opposant 2 is another one that we didn't do.
The worst.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Because it actually cares about, like, is this piece is like first move of the game.
Right.
It cares about
Right.
things like that,
Right.
which is
And
something-
is it the first move of the game, and did they choose this optional first move?
yeah.
Yeah.
Right. But that's more or less how these inputs work. You could have any kind of input here, right?
Yeah.
This is just a way that probably works for a lot of different kinds of
Yeah.
mechanics.
Yeah.
But the real metadata part of it is that you've got a mechanic, and then you've got a set of inputs that the
Right.
engine.
A mechanic that the game offers to component developers to reference and configure. So this is like move configurations, and these are capture configurations, and you could imagine a castling configuration, or a jump configuration, or a multi-capture configuration, or whatever.
So, like imagining something that would make this really easy for for a player to make a component. You might have some kind of interface where you've got your piece and then it asks you which mechanics you want your piece to have, and then you can just
Right.
you can drag it around on a board to show it which kinds of moves you want it to be able to make, things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Cool. So I have a question.
Sure.
Not related. Well, it is related to this, but it's the part that you didn't talk about.
Yeah. The market.
I mean, and I imagine there's not much code, but plenty of thought, which is the crypto economic
Yeah.
component to this.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one, just as a tool, as a concept, like I just think this is fun. I immediately thought about doing like challenges. You know, you open up the paper and they've got the
Yeah.
like wins in 3, right? Like
Yeah.
a lot of really fun things that can be done with that.
Sure.
But yeah, there's a money making thing.
Right.
I love money. I think a lot
Right.
of developers definitely love money.
Yeah.
So when you kind of like dangle the carrot, so I'm gonna try and
Sure.
at it.
Sure.
What? And it doesn't necessarily need to be this. Like it could be more abstract, more general. But what are your thoughts on how that would work?
Yeah, I can talk through that with this specific example. So this squad chess game itself has a bit of metadata that is instructions on how to launch the game. So it's a web game, so it'll be just a URL. So there's a bit of metadata that says squad chess is going to this URL and putting in the squad SDK, plugging in the squad SDK this way. So there's a bit of metadata that can launch the game. Then there's a bit of metadata for all of the formats that anybody in the world has ever submitted, and there's a bit of metadata for every component that anyone in the world has ever submitted. Whenever anybody submits any one of these definitions, a game, a format, or a component, the system will create a curved bond contract on Ethereum tied to that bit of metadata. And so that metadata has a bond, and investors can buy that pieces. They can buy the games bond, they can buy formats bonds, and they can buy components bonds. And the game, we haven't done this in this game yet, but the game could enforce a player to own certain bits of that bond before the game will let them play with those components. So you could say you have to own the standard format to play the standard format here. And it could also, like, that opens up all kinds of possibilities for the game developers to reward their contributors with like any format that gets purchased for this game. We will then purchase a little tiny bit. We'll take half of that money and purchase a little tiny bit of all of the components bonds that are in it. So even if your piece doesn't ever get played with much, the fact that it's in a format that's good means that you're part of a good thing that people like and that people are paying for. And so, yeah. So the way that a contributor makes money is they have the opportunity to buy the first part of this bond. How familiar are you with curved bonds? I know you and I have talked about it from time to time. Okay. So it's like buy in early, and that's a financial advantage. So whenever you contribute something, you get the option of, in that same Ethereum transaction, you get the option to buy the first however many you want if you pay for them according to the curve. So you get the cheapest purchase of the curve. And actually, if you own the very bottom of the curve, you never lose that money. You can always get it back out. It's a stake at that point. You've only staked some money, right? Because you own the cheapest of all of it, and you paid that, and no one can sell from under you and reduce the value of what you've owned. It can only go up. So if anybody else buys, then your value goes up if you sell after them. So that's the way that contributors can make money by being the very first investor in their work and having the value of that work go up. There's a lot more, and we're writing a white paper with that. There's you can invest in the platform and get discounts for your early purchases, things like that. But that's beyond the scope of this for sure. But that's.
Have you gone down the rabbit hole of players making money? And so, like, a couple of thoughts. Which one is,
Sure.
okay, let's say using this platform as playing a tournament.
Yep.
Maybe
Yeah.
it's a little crazy. But like maybe it's pay per move, which would be kind of
Interesting.
interesting to
Yeah.
do, but like imagine a game
Yeah.
where a chess game where
Yeah.
the players are incentivized to use the least amount of moves as possible to make the most amount of money. So, like,
Yes.
right.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And then you like the game
Yeah.
owner maybe makes a little something off.
Yeah,
of it,
yeah.
I don't know.
Or the tournament host or whatever. Yeah, so that's totally possible for a game developer. So what this platform gives a lot of power to the game developer, and a lot of flexibility to the game developer. What we've done here is made a game that just lets everybody do anything for free. But what we could do is we could build in a like a daily ladder, like a tournament or a daily. Anybody can make a tournament, invite anybody else. It's a cash tournament. It's a 50-50 prize. And those tournaments could run like that. You could have a pay per move, or you could have a pay for extra time on your chess clock, or whatever.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean,
But-
there's definitely a lot of ways to nest all
Yeah.
this stuff. One of the earlier ways we were imagining what a format was things like that, right? So this format, you have to pay to play a match in this format.
Right.
You have to
Right.
do this thing.
Right.
That, a lot of that stuff can go in that kind of world.
Right.
And then you can have, or it could go in a tournament. But one way of looking at it would be to say a tournament is kind of contains a format. Like a tournament has a format. So it's like we're doing a tournament, and it's this structure, and we're using this format, and it's this one where you have to pay for moves or whatever, right?
Yeah. So
we also briefly talked about things like what if someone wanted to broadcast the
Right.
tournament, something
Right.
like that.
So that's the other thing that gets created. The other thing that gets created with any definition is a license, and that's just like a meat space legal license, right? And we really want to make as much like some standard licenses with some examples of how to implement that in code, like implement like following those licenses in code, so that contributors can just kind of select from a set, and games can say we support this license for revenue sharing, or for there's a bunch of different things like tournament promotion licenses and things like that.
Some easy way for if you just want to whip out a component, you had this cool idea for a rook that moves like a knight or whatever. You can just click a button and know that, hey, if this ever becomes popular, I will be able to make.
I'll make some money off
as
it.
long as I bought some initial.
Yeah.
Right. How would you, or how do you imagine preventing people from stealing other ideas? Like, I presume you wouldn't want to have a game where 5 people develop a rook.
Right. That's tough. I think that's one of the hard problems we're going to have to figure out.
Yeah.
We've got some ideas,
bunch
but yeah.
yeah, there's a bunch of ideas around that.
Yeah.
But it's hard to imagine a system that doesn't at least depend on just people going places where they are wanted, first of all. So like people supporting, right? Like if it's possible for me to make a game that doesn't cost anyone ever any money, but is somehow a better game than the X developer that charges for their game, then I'm going to do that. But if you look around, usually most games are charging for things and then paying for things to some degree, and that seems to lead to a good enough product that people are willing to pay for it. And I'd expect something like that's probably able to happen. But then I think no matter what, some elements of the system will end up depending on just a legal system, probably the traditional legal system, maybe some kind of.
So we're hoping to rely on the existing legal system to like give contributors some power to take people to court if they're
well, and I'm thinking
plagiarized,
preventative measures built within the platform, right?
Yeah.
So, you have your contract, and I assume in that contract, what you've built would be articulated, right? It would have to be. You'd have to say, okay, this is the component, or this is the piece that I've developed.
The metadata would be referenced. Yeah.
The metadata would be there.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a hash, right?
Yeah. The hash would be on Ethereum. The metadata would be in the store.
Right.
Yep.
So if someone makes that, I would imagine the system would go, oh no, hey man, you can't create this contract. Like, it exists already.
It exists already. So the problem with that is you could change one character that doesn't make a material difference and get a new piece of metadata because you'd get a new hash. So that
You can do what you said,
Yeah.
like prevent an exact copy, right? But
yeah,
just
and in
like
fact our
plagiarism,
system does. Yeah.
there are lots of ways to plagiarize without exactly copying.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's even, and it's a total spectrum, right? Like,
Yeah.
the spectrum from this is actually totally fair use to it's completely plagiarism is a totally smooth
Yeah.
gradient.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing that makes me think, to some degree, some traditional legal stuff's gonna have to
Right.
accept there,
But then
or
also
at least human
something.
human
Yeah,
thing.
human. So that does bring up the governance DAO. The platform we envision being governed by a governance DAO that has that maintains a terms of service for using the platform, and that can be invested in itself, and that also funds platform development or any development. Like it might fund tournaments if that's what the DAO decides they want to do.
Yeah, and that's how it's. Besides people that might directly invest in that DAO, a lot of the power is going to be held by the contributors to the system.
Right.
So people that contributed games, contributed components, contributed formats, and then people purchased those tokens.
Yeah.
You know, that stake will be represented in the governance of the organization, basically.
Right.
So,
Right.
Stakeholder
Right.
governance.
And so they'll be able to enforce. They'll have a good incentive to enforce those legal contracts and carry those things out as members of this governance organization.
Yeah, thinking about it in too much detail is probably looking too far ahead.
Yeah.
But you can imagine some sort of network effect based ways of enforcement as well.
Yeah.
Like if there's some popular portal where most people go to like look for new games to play or whatever, and that is just owned by the DAO or owned by some group, then that group can say like, well, we're just not going to display you if we feel like you're violating licensing.
Right.
You know, we can't actually take you down, but like nobody's going to see what you're doing.
Yeah, it's a little bit like the internet in that way.
Right.
It's a distributed system, right? So, yeah. Well, cool. Sounds like we'll keep you up to date on how these things are going, and we'll let you know when we start working on the markets. And we've got that pretty well architected out. The crypto economic architecture is there, but that's the next step. We definitely wanted to start with the games though, and like prove that games could be built this way. First of all, like real games could be built this way, and that it made sense to engineers, and that it made sense to developers, and that people would want to jump in and participate.